And we should have the rest of the group back with us in just a minute. They're starting to filter back in.
I was in a room all by myself.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jay. I wasn't paying close enough attention. So was the conversation good at least?
Just wondering where somebody else was.
All right. Well, I'm just going to kind of go through our screen, our slides here. We'll start with a little housekeeping. So during the presentation, please mute yourself so that we don't have unwanted background noise. If you do have a question, you can raise your hand. We can use the chat box, or maybe you could go ahead and unmute yourself and interrupt if the subject's going too quick and you want to get that question in. Questions are always good because it helps everybody learn. So we certainly encourage it. We just don't want to have a lot of background noise. My dog barks if the doorbell goes off, and that can be annoying. Everybody, there is a chat box, and if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see that chat box. So I encourage everybody to put their contact information into the chat box. You can also put questions. We'll try to keep an eye on that and see, if we see the questions there. Or again, at the bottom of your screen, you can see where you can raise your hand, and that would be another way to kind of get some attention to ask a question. And then at the end of the meeting, you can actually save that chat box as a text file. So it gives you the opportunity to connect with other people. Again, this is a networking meeting, and we're really trying to push that networking opportunity. It's a little bit awkward because we are not in person, but this is the next best thing. Our website is denveralr.org, and this is the site that we've put together. We're actually in the process of having this rebuilt by one of our sponsors, but we've tried to put on here a lot of links that are especially important if you're here in Colorado. That first link is the helpful links right here, and if you're in Colorado, this is the regulations that you have to follow. So this is the first thing you need to know. This is so important because this is all the rules. So you need to know this like the back of your hand. If you're in this business, there's probably 67 pages here to go through and understand. And then I want to point out that this year's national conference, it's the RAL National Conference, and there's a link to that conference right there on our page. I highly encourage everybody to go to this conference. Last year, there was about 600 people there, several different presentations, all kinds of knowledge. So it's great networking, it's great education. It's 3 days in Arizona in October. So that's a link to it. And we might be able to, I'm still working to see if we can get to any kind of a discount if you're a member of our group. This is our Facebook page. And I think we're up to about 250 members on this page, and we really encourage everybody to join. And this is a great place to just ask questions if you're, if you're wondering something. Again, it's a networking thing. So we want you guys to be able to go in here and talk to other people and bounce things off of other operators. If you're learning this business, try to understand. You get a lot of advice from this particular page. So I highly encourage you to do that. This is the meetup page where everybody logged in just to get to this link. We're actually over 530 members right now in that. So we're growing. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the sponsors that we have in our group. And this is, we've got 6 of them going right now. First one is the National Association, RAL National Association. And if you're a member, then you do get a free associate level of the RALNA. There's a newsletter that they put out. There's group purchasing benefits. If you own a home, you can get some discounts on some of the things. And then you do get a discount on the membership level of RALNA. And we happen to have the president of RALNA here, Mr. Brian Pinkowski. Brian, do you want to say anything about the group?
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's different than a lot of the state level association meetings where there's a lot of training on what the regulations are and that sort of thing. It's a it's much more business oriented. There's also, while there is a lot of technical caregiving related expertise from national experts, particularly in memory care, there's a lot of business related things that help us all run the businesses a lot better. So, for example, Robert Kiyosaki was there last year for understanding which way the market is going. We had Harry Dent there, the guy who did the demographic cliff, and we had Dr. Bill Thomas, the guy who created the greenhouse model, and a number of others that were there that were not what you would typically find in an assisted living conference. So, our vendors will provide a lot of information about the new technologies, and there'll be expertise there for some of the things that you'll need to know to operate things, and there'll be some cool products and that sort of thing. But the speakers themselves are different. This is much more of an exciting kind of a business conference where you learn about the investment side and how to expand. Towards that end, I got your question, Vern, about whether we can get some sort of a discount going. And I'm talking to our executive director on the side screen over here to see if there's anything that we've been developing to sweeten the pot right now. And the answer is yes, there will be. You'll be getting a code. Your members will be getting a code from us for $100 off if they sign up. So that's a positive thing.
Terrific.
At this point, the convention is still going straight ahead. The COVID thing is expected to kind of peter off a little bit. We're all hoping. And right now, nobody's canceling. And so we're all moving forward to do another RoundNotCon again this year. It should be exciting. I'll be there. My wife, who's always a very popular speaker about the nuts and bolts of things, such as what you're talking about tonight, or we'll be talking about tonight, she's there. And that's that. Thanks, Vern.
You bet, Brian. Thank you. Our next sponsor is Anderson Legal Business and Tax Advisors. These guys are very helpful when it comes to putting together your entities and tax advice. I recently had them go through my tax returns for the last couple of years and just see if there was anything my CPA missed. Actually, my CPA did a pretty good job, so that was kind of nice to know. But that's part of their Platinum program. So you can reach out to them, let them know that we sent you over there, and they're good for those kind of things. You always want an attorney that's a specialist, and these guys are the tax guys in setting up that legal entity. And then, of course, we have the Residential Assisted Living Academy. So if you're learning this business, this is really the best place that I've seen to actually learn about what's going on and how to do this business. And we have a link to that directly on our page. And then we have, if you have an existing assisted living, Peter Brissett with Assisted Living Marketing. He builds websites. He helps you understand how to market your assisted living. And he's been doing this for quite some time. I'd say he's one of the experts in the field. He's a local guy, so you definitely want to get to know him. And then, of course, we've got Pinkowski Law, of which we have the honor of having Brian and Michelle Pinkowski be our presenters tonight. And they understand so much about the zoning and the regulations, and they do this nationally. So no matter where you're at, these are the people to talk to kind of maneuver through all that zoning stuff that we go through. It's a challenge, and they've been doing this internationally for several years. So we're very fortunate to have them in our backyard, but they do work nationally.
Thanks, Vern.
You're welcome, Brian. And then we have a Better Way Realty. That's who I represent. And we do lease options for assisted living. You can look us up here at the rowleaseoptions.com just to get an idea of what our program's all about. And I've been brokering these businesses for about 4 years now. And I like to help people find opportunities and get in the door and help operators expand their existing businesses, and we can help you with the financing of that. I can help you with the brokerage side on that. If you're looking to sell or looking to buy, that's what I do. And that should do it for our sponsors. So Brian Pinkowski, I met him and Michelle at the Ralnut Con. It was 2 or 3 years ago. I forget how long ago. It's been 3. And again, it was really a pleasure to get to know them and understand what they were doing. And then when I found out they were here in our backyard, we could not be any luckier. We went through some major rule changes in our assisted living through Colorado just a couple years ago, and they were instrumental in helping the state understand that some of those rule changes were not beneficial, were actually going to hurt the small businesses. And thanks to Brian and Michelle, they were able to get some of the changes done on those rules that did not kill our industry, because if some of those rules had gone through, we would have seen several businesses go out of business. And we were just so fortunate to have them local, and they actually volunteered their time for our industry to go through all that. So we really appreciate everything that they've done. We're thrilled that they are able to be part of our group, and that we're connected with them nationally as well. And looks like Michelle just joined us as well. So perfect timing, Michelle. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you guys can share your screen and give us your presentation. Let's give them a round of applause.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to suggest that Michelle shares her screen while I make a few comments regarding what you've just said. First of all of those sponsors are absolutely fantastic to work with. We have the highest respect for Anderson and what those guys do as lawyers. They do fantastic incorporation and tax work. Really, really good stuff. Similarly, a Better Way Realty is, they provide a product for people who want to get into this business all over the United States that, frankly, I haven't seen anything like it. And it's truly, truly admirable what you guys are doing. And it looks like my time is up, and you'll get to hear from Michelle.
You're muted, Michelle.
All right, sorry, I went to share my screen and it went blank. So can you hear me now? Okay, great. Let me try to, can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. Let's do this here. Okay. So what we want to talk to you about tonight is a lot of the questions that we get, and that is about HOAs and public meetings. So we know that so many homes today are in an HOA, or I don't know if everybody, I think not everybody here is from Colorado. If you're from other states, you might not have an HOA, but you might have deed restrictions on your property. This is more common in Texas and the South. And so I'm going to use those things interchangeably, HOAs and deed restrictions, because basically the things I'm going to talk about tonight apply to both of them. So I'll kind of give you the overview about why assisted living residences, or residential assisted living, or group homes for the disabled, you know, we talk about them interchangeably with those terms, why they are in fact allowed in HOAs. And then Brian's going to talk to you about how to handle public meetings. So that could be a public meeting with the Planning and Zoning Commission or the City Council, you know, an actual public meeting, or maybe an open house that you would have with your neighbors, and interacting with the HOA. And Brian is especially suited for talking to you about that. I'll let him tell you why when we get to his part. But So just a disclaimer, this is, because we're lawyers, we have to say this, this is not legal advice, it's just educational only. Of course, I don't want you to go and put a contract on a house that's in an HOA without actually looking at the bylaws or the deed restrictions that are on the property, or having somebody look at them for you, okay? These are general rules based on some general things that we see, okay? It's not a substitute for actual legal advice. Topics for tonight, as I already mentioned, what do you need to know if you want to locate your assisted living in a neighborhood governed by an HOA, and best practices for handling public meetings. HOA, so what are you going to hear from HOAs? You're going to hear a couple things, and these may actually be in the covenants. Businesses are not allowed. Could be worded in different ways, but basically that's the message, is that can't be commercial, or it's limited to single family only. They'll say, oh, this is for single family only. This is, you can't have a group home here. Or just kind of a general, you can't do that here, right? Just this blanket statement that people say. And so I want to just kind of give you the background and give you some rebuttal if you hear that. You might hear it not from Vern, of course, but from other realtors. I've had clients where the realtors told them, oh, no, the HOA won't let you do that here. You might hear it from land use lawyers who just aren't familiar with this use or the Fair Housing Act. Oh, I just gave you a hint about why HOAs are special. You might hear it from the neighbors themselves. So here I'm going to give you the little background that you need where you can educate people. Why are group homes special, and why should they be allowed in HOAs? Well, it's the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act is the tool that we have in our tool belt when it comes to assisted living residents that we really have to understand. And I have a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. up here because I like to give credit where credit's due. The Fair Housing Act is part of the Civil Rights Act. And Dr. King fought for fair housing. Unfortunately, it only came about after his death. And then that was in 1968. But protection for people with disabilities didn't happen until 1988. So, but thank goodness it's in place now. And why are we talking about disabilities? You know, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I want to have a home to help elderly people. Are elderly people covered by the Fair Housing Act? And the answer is no. The Fair Housing Act doesn't protect people just because they're elderly, but it does protect people who are disabled. And the definition of disability is such that people who are going to be with you in your assisted living residence will be considered disabled under the law. So they're protected by both federal law and usually state law. In Colorado and many, many other states, we have state fair housing laws that pretty much mimic the federal fair housing law. So what does it say? The first key with fair housing prohibitions against discrimination is that it's illegal to discriminate in the sale or rental, or to otherwise make available or deny, I'll come back to that phrase in just a minute, a dwelling to someone because of their disability. So when we're talking about HOA covenants or CC&Rs or deed restrictions, that is a way where people are trying to otherwise make unavailable a house to someone because they're disabled, right? You can't be here in a group home. And I should mention these principles apply to group homes for other disabilities. I always talk about elderly disabled people because that's who most of our clients are, but it applies equally to sober homes, to homes for people with brain injuries, veterans with PTSD, developmentally disabled people, mentally disabled people, anyone who's disabled, same. So basically the HOA covenants, if people try to construe them in a way to say you can't have a group home for a disabled person here or a group of disabled people here, basically they're saying we are trying to otherwise deny or make available this home to you. And the disability can either be of the person who's buying or renting the home. It could be a person who's intending to live there, like your residents, or it could be you because you're associated with a disabled person and you're trying to create the home for them. So it's about equality and housing opportunities. Now, additionally, if there is some HOA rule that is being construed in a way that inhibits that housing opportunity that you're trying to create, you could ask also, in addition to just saying you can't do it because it's discriminatory, you could say, well, you need to make an exception for me. And that's called reasonable accommodation. So failing to grant reasonable accommodation to create that housing opportunity is itself a fair housing violation, because reasonable accommodation, the requirement for that is something that's required under the Fair Housing Act. So let me give you some examples of how this can apply. I mentioned it already. Maybe in the bylaws it says, the only thing you can build in this neighborhood is a single family residence. Well, there was a case out of Texas, actually, just this year called the Harmony House case. This is just a sample case. There's been many others that said specifically a single family deed restriction cannot be used to exclude group homes for disabled people from single family neighborhoods. And it doesn't matter if there's some kind of commercial element to the group home, because that's what disabled people might need to enable them to live there. They need that supportive service, and they have to pay somebody to do that. So there's a little bit of a commercial element, but that doesn't make it a business. It's still a single family use. On the right-hand side, you'll see residential only, kind of same vein there. There's a Colorado Supreme Court, actually, a case out of Evergreen, where an Evergreen Homeowners Association tried to prevent a group for young people with disabilities. They had different kinds of disabilities. But the court said, and they did it saying, it's not a residential use, it's a business, and we don't allow businesses. And the Colorado Supreme Court said, no, it has a character of a residential home, even, again, if there's some commercial aspect to it. And then the cases that I really like that are really, really fun is if neighbors do something, these are the general rules, right? But it doesn't mean that people aren't going to misbehave. So sometimes neighbors do that, and they're misguided in their legal counsel, or they have God forbid, they have a lawyer in the neighborhood, and that neighbor starts representing the neighbors, which is what happened in one of these cases. And the neighbors there's one case out of Kansas where the neighbors actually threatened to take the group home to litigation, and then did bring a state lawsuit against them. And the person who was trying to establish the group home filed a complaint with HUD. HUD ultimately referred it to the Department of Justice, and lo and behold, those neighbors were the defendants in a lawsuit brought by the Department of Justice, which I would suggest nobody really wants to be in that position. It wasn't very nice. There's two cases like that, actually. Another case where the neighbors kind of started this campaign trying to get other people on board, saying, you don't really want this group home in your neighborhood. And they did some things that were really kind of unseemly in that vein. And the Department of Justice brought an action against them, each personally, and they were each held to have discriminated in violation of the Fair Housing Act, and they had to each pay money, damages, and some were, tens of thousands of dollars. So this is what happens when neighbors are not fully advised of the Fair Housing Act. That's why we like to educate people about why the Fair Housing Act applies, and why it's appropriate to not contest that in their neighborhood.
Michelle, I don't want to interrupt you, but from my end, you're losing a lot of volume. I don't know if it's only me or if it is everybody. So if you guys are having trouble hearing Michelle, can you raise your hand? If not, I'm assuming it's just my computer. All right, it must just be me.
Good. Well, I'm sorry, Vern. I'm sorry
No
that it's you,
worries.
but I'm glad
Hopefully
it's not
it
everybody
comes across
else.
on the recording.
And you can still see my screen?
Yeah, I can see you fine.
Okay, fantastic.
Thanks.
So a couple of caveats, quid pro quos, like we like to say as lawyers. Don't forget that even if we get the use neighbors to understand that you get to be in the neighborhood, you still have to comply with other parts of the bylaws or the restrictions, right? So there might be some restrictions that say, especially if you're building a home, you have to go to the design review committee and get the designs approved. You still have to do that. They can't object because the design is for a group home, but they could, object based on, setbacks or lot coverage or whatever, non-discriminatory reasons. If there are general rules about operation, there's actually a case, sometimes you just shake your head, how this actually got to be a lawsuit, I don't know, but there was a lawsuit when a group home parked an RV outside the home in violation of the covenants. And it actually went all the way to court. And the court said, no, the covenant says that nobody can park an RV outside, whether you're disabled or not disabled. So take your RV somewhere else. You can't have excessive noise or trash. Sometimes there are complaints about this from sober homes, that there's some kind of nuisance being created. So just generally, you have to comply with the rules of the neighborhood in general. But there is reasonable accommodation can be requested for other things, not just to approve the use for you to be there. For example, if we had one client who was building out the garage and the neighbors complained and said, no, you're not allowed to put a window in the garage, which of course you need a window if you're going to have a bedroom in the garage. And so we asked for reasonable accommodation and got that. Sometimes there might be some rules that say you can't have any construction in front of the home. Well, they can't use that rule to prevent an accessibility, a handicap ramp, for example. So reasonable accommodation can be granted for that. And of course, the big one is just because you're okay with the HOA, or you will be okay with the HOA, you still have to comply with zoning. So don't forget about zoning. It's two different issues. So with that, that's the end of the HOA portion. And I don't know, Brian, do you want to take some questions on that now, or go ahead into the public meeting and we'll just take questions at the end?
I think it's a good idea to take a few questions now, Michelle. Just in the breakout meetings, people were here from around the country specifically to hear what you had to say about HOAs.
Okay, I don't see any chat box or anything, so maybe.
I actually have a specific question about zoning, if that's okay.
It's okay with me.
So I just bought a house, 8 rooms, would love to be able to turn it into an assisted living facility, but I already have one directly next door to me. Like there's literally one like directly next door, like I'm 1540 and they're 1550. And so, yeah, there's a zoning regulation that says you're not allowed to have another assisted living facility within 500 feet. And so I was just wondering if there's any way around that whatsoever, some sort of variance or anything that y'all have dealt with or seen, or anything that I could possibly do, or any other thoughts on how I could.
Are you in Colorado?
Colorado Springs.
Okay. That one is going to be a little tough one, I have to be honest with you, because spacing requirements, you can get reasonable accommodation to spacing requirements. And cities have to consider that. In fact, we have a case in front of HUD down in Arizona right now because the city wouldn't even consider the request. And cities have different, or at the state level also, they have different spacing requirements. You're saying 500 feet. Some of them are a quarter mile, half a mile. I've seen 3/4 of a mile. In general, the cases under the Fair Housing Act that have considered this, they don't like spacing requirements, but they don't like the spacing requirements that require, that are too big. Like a quarter mile is iffy, half a mile, 3/4 mile, that's too far. Courts don't like spacing requirements because it's a restriction on where disabled people with disabilities can live in the neighborhood. But on the same token, the reason that the disabled category was added to the Fair Housing Act in the first place was to get people with disabilities out of institutions. And so there is an argument that if group homes locate too close to one another, that you're basically creating just a neighborhood of group homes. so that disabled people aren't integrating into the actual community. So if you have a 500-foot requirement, that's probably going to be viewed as reasonable. You're probably not going to get reasonable accommodation to that. It doesn't mean you can't try, but and it also depends on how many other group homes are in the neighborhood. You know, if it's only those two and then there aren't any others for miles and miles, then maybe there's an argument.
Michelle,
Go ahead.
we've seen some cities where they specifically didn't pay any attention to their own spacing requirements, or they calculated it in a funny way so that it would work out. So, I mean, there's a lot of variables to this question. And first is the law, and then the second is, well, how does the city really want to treat this?
Very true.
The other thing you mentioned is that it specifically says that the elderly are considered disabled. Well, inside, again, one of the exceptions to the rule was that if it was a disabled group home, then it was allowed to happen, and the spacing requirements were not a necessity. I mean, it specifically said disabled. So whenever you, at the beginning of this, said that they're classified as disabled, then that would fall under a assisted living residence, I would think, or does.
Okay, we're starting to get some specific legal advice kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we'd be a lot more comfortable to have that conversation offline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But yes, your residents are disabled, so that's in your favor.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else with a question right now? Okay, Brian, why don't we go forward? We can always have questions at the end, or we're always available.
Right, okay, very good. You stop sharing and I'll figure out how to do it. And a moment, please. Okay. So my background is I started out initially in my professional career as an engineer for the Environmental Protection Agency. So my job initially, which tells you how old I am, was to go to hundreds of little cities to talk to city councils and local communities about why they should actually put sewage treatment plants instead of just disposing of sewage directly into the rivers and streams. So now we might kind of think to ourselves that that was a fairly obvious thing. Back at that point in time, it was not so obvious to a lot of people. And so literally hundreds and hundreds of small town public meetings with political officials, and not a single one of them was I welcome. So it was a pretty rough way to learn about how to handle public meetings and difficult audiences en masse. And since that time, I went on to law school and done a lot of the same thing, either working with cities who were handling problems and dealing with public meetings, or communities or businesses who were trying to handle something, and there would be the pitchforks in the community. And then I spent some time overseas, about 12 years, working in different countries, including Iraq. Again, the same kind of thing, public meetings in foreign countries. And what I've observed is that people are the same when it comes to public meetings. How do I get this to move forward? Here we go. So the first rule of public meetings is, if you don't have to have a public meeting, don't ask for one. Because you're dealing with a group of people. You're not dealing with 12 rational people who are going to think about things. You're dealing with a group. And that's a different kind of a thinking process, as we'll talk about in a minute. So if you don't have to have a public meeting, if you don't have to have a zoning meeting, if you don't have an open house, I don't encourage you to do it. I mean, we're going to hear some stories about it, but if you don't need to, don't do it. However, if you do have to have one and you have to have an open house because the city requires you to talk to your neighbors or something like that, the first rule there is make sure you're talking to individuals, that you don't set up an audience. Because another way to look at an audience when you're on stage is it's a shooting gallery and you're the duck. So what we know nowadays from a lot of public meetings and public protests and whatnot is that people in a group do the most amazing things that we would never expect them to do. And this is pretty old psychology about groups. I'm going to read you something from 1841, one of the early psychologists who studied groups, Gustave Le Bon. And his work was the foundation for a lot of marketing and political strategy that we see today. 1841. It's called The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind. Oh my goodness. So organized crowds have played an important role in people's lives, but given to the exaggeration in its feelings, a crowd is only impressed by excessive sentiments. An orator wishing to move a crowd must make abusive use of violent affirmations, to exaggerate, to affirm, to resort to repetitions, and never attempt to prove anything by reasoning or methods of argument. These have been known for more than 100 years for how to handle crowds, and we see that in political speech today. So if you have to go to a public meeting, or if you have to have an open house, you've got to talk to individuals. You're not gonna, the stories we've had over and over again where people have come back from a public meeting and said, if they had just listened to me. And they can't. They just literally can't. Now, none of this is legal advice that we're talking about with respect to public meetings. This is just survival when you're trying to make things go forward. So when you're working with a group of people, even if it's as few as 10, if they're there, it's not because they love you. It's there because they want to protest about something or if they want to raise a fuss. And so if they're coming to your open house, it's going to be difficult to handle them if you talk to them as a group. You've got to carve them up and talk to them as individuals. One of the ways to do that is name tags, and put them on the spot with names. Talk to them as individuals one at a time so that they can't be this amorphous mob of a group mind that isn't thinking. When you're talking to individuals, it will happen. I had a public meeting once in Bell Mountain Ranch where we had a guy who was very snarky, and he was trying to get a bunch of people wound up. And the first thing I did was sit down right next to him to deflate him. And then that just totally shut him up, because it was harder for him to be ugly, because we have civilizing behavior in our culture. It was harder for him to be ugly while he's right there next to me. And then as I was leaving, then he got his courage back up again and started to say snarky things again. And I was able to turn to him and say, look, and I walked right up close to him again, which so totally freaked out everybody in the room. And I said, look, if you don't know how to behave in a public meeting with your neighbors, you really shouldn't be here. And the key thing there is call them by name, have individual conversations. So when I had that conversation with him, everybody else disappeared. It was our conversation. If you have a public meeting, or if you have to have an open house or a public meeting, we'll talk about how to do that in a public space. But if you're having an open house, control the space. So you can bring people in so you can talk to them as a group. That's a mistake. I've seen the highway department do this. I've seen other people do this on smaller settings. Set up little booths, set up little information spots where there's flyers in different places in the house so that you control a traffic flow and can, again, talk to individual people instead of allowing them to get wound up about something. Don't make a group presentation. Let them kind of flow around so that they can't get wound up and turn off their brains. But if you are in a group setting where people start to get a little nasty, even if they're in your open house, you have to be cool as much as possible, and as unfair as a lot of things that they've got to say might be. Just be really, really calm and gracious. And if they get out of line, just remind them that they're guests, One of the people who's often at these meetings is a woman by the name of Jen Conrad, who happens to be a vice principal or something at a high school when she's not running her assisted living. Is that right, Michelle? Something like that? High school?
And she was a principal. I think she's retired now, but she was a principal.
She's a principal. And so she had her open house and people started to get a little fussy with them. And of course, she's used to dealing with fussy people. And so she was able to handle them right away. Similarly, we had a fellow who, Michelle was on our HOA board, right? On our homeowners association board. And one of the guys was who had some ruling against him that he didn't like, came over to talk to her and he got wound up. And I asked him to leave. And so just remember whose house it is. You can be nice about it. You're not a whipping post. If they come into your house, just ask them to leave. If you have to have the meeting, it's still your territory. So if you got a planning commission meeting or a city council meeting, the trick there is that you got to bring a lot of friends. If there's opposition, they're going to bring a lot of friends. They want to look like a mob. They want to have posters and have all kinds of crazy things. We saw some really ugly things in Boulder a couple years ago where people brought a big group. And the way you handle that is you bring lots of people, bring your own friends, and then you force that group to disperse. You get there with your people early and you take up all the spaces in weird spots so that they can't form little clusters of angry people. And that diffuses them. Either that or fill up all the seats and force them to sit in the back and look like crazy people. That also,
Hey, Brian, can I interject something here?
please.
Also, if you're in a public meeting, you generally have to sign up, or the people who want to speak have to sign up. So get there in advance or send somebody to get there in advance and pick some people to speak on your behalf and get them signed up right away. So that's what we have a developer friend here in Boulder doing a very large senior housing development. Lots of massive neighborhood opposition. And he had people, he had sent somebody down there. He got it so that I could speak first, you know, try to take the slots, especially the key ones, first couple ones to load it up in your favor.
Absolutely. And there are all these little strategic things that you need to do. Now, it's important when you're going through this process that, let's see, this should have been well timed, that you try not to let this upset you. Remember what I said about people being in a group. Your otherwise rational neighbors will go crazy when they start getting in a little cluster of people, and you won't be able to understand what they're doing or saying. And then you'll end up being surprised. So if you get upset with them in return, then you kind of put something there that wouldn't normally stick there. Their anger and irrationality will pass as you finally move into the neighborhood and start doing things. And what we will see is it's not unusual. Then we have a story here. Actually, yeah, we have a story in Colorado where one of our clients had an angry neighbor who showed up with a mob. And then after it was open and whatnot, she brought her father in to be a resident. So it just goes to show that if you have to go through this angsty public process, don't. But if you have to, don't let it bother you, understanding that you're dealing with a different mentality until that whole thing is over.
Well, people take a while to deal with change, you know, and so that's what we have friends in Ohio who had the same situation. Neighbors objected. And then later somebody called her up when her house was open and wanted to come and tour. And she said, well, oh, great. How did you hear about it? And the woman admitted, she's like, well, I'm one of your neighbors that objected. But when I got to thinking about it, I thought it'd be really, really nice to have my dad just here on the block. So you just never know. People will calm down. It's just a change management thing.
Absolutely right. So this whole connection between managing the HOAs in the process where they're trying to exercise some point of view on something and then moving through the meetings with them in public, that's not an unusual cycle for assisted living homes to be. People are afraid of something different, even if they don't understand it. And there you have it. I don't really have anything else to share with you guys on that. Oh, But there we are at the National Convention last year. It's at the Residential Assisted Living National Convention in Phoenix last year. Do you have any other questions for Michelle or I about HOAs and the processes that follow them? Excellent.
This is Mike. We're going to have a property in Denver, so we're going to have a public meeting. And so what, like charts, graphs, anything like that, I mean, obviously one-on-one's better, but if you can't, and I mean, what should you display at your open house? I mean, what do you recommend?
Okay, so let me make sure I got this right. You've got a public meeting that's going to happen
In Denver.
It's going to be an open house, or it's going to be a
Well, I don't
council?
know. I mean, I don't know specifically what Denver is going to make me do. It's going to be a few months down the road, but you know, that's the plan. So I'm just trying to figure out, you know, open house wise, like, like what all should I throw out at my guests that are in there?
Okay, well, it depends on where your meeting's going to be. So let's just start with finding out what that is. I'm happy to talk with you casually about some suggestions on how to handle that public meeting situation. So if it's going to be in a public forum, bring your friends, divide up the room, have people ready to make discussions about how important it is to take care of our seniors and not move them out to institutional areas. If it's going to be in your home, control how they move through your house. Make sure there's information put here and there and everywhere so that you can divide them up and keep them from being fussy as a group. And it really is just that simple. We post a series of little snippets on just exactly these points on our website and on Vern's Facebook post on his Facebook page. So you'll be able to see any of those. And as I said, you can call either of us and we're happy to talk with you about it.
And I would say, Mike, also if it's a presentation or open house, make sure you get some information out there about why you're doing a small home, why it's beneficial versus an institution, why it's beneficial for not just the elderly disabled residents, but also the neighborhood to have, you know, this intergenerational fabric of society stay in neighborhoods rather than segregating old people, you know, because I have to get on my soapbox a little bit here. Probably a number of you have heard this already. It's just wrong that we are segregating, you know, people. People live in the neighborhoods their entire lives, right? They raise their kids there. They create their space, they create their environment, they know their neighbors, and all of a sudden then they get old and maybe they need help and they're segregated out to wherever, you know, the zoning says they have to be in some institution. Why is that right? You know, so just talk to people about why small homes are good. You know, what are the health benefits? Assure people, you know, you're going to hear, oh, the parking's going to be a problem. Traffic's going to be a problem. It's not going to look like the rest of the neighborhood. So just make sure that you have answers for those things.
Do you have stats on the property values and the parking? I mean, do you have access to any of that, or is there a resource?
Well, the stats, if you don't mind, Michelle, the stats on property values are something that we're still pulling together. We haven't been able to show that there's no harm to property values. And we've heard anecdotally that it's the other direction because nobody with an assisted living is going to have a trashed yard. And alternatively, we also haven't heard stats that shows that it goes the other way. So, I mean, those stats are kind of difficult to pull together. As part of the National Association, we are trying to gather that kind of information under the notion that smaller is better. We do have other information that indicates that, like, for example, under the whole COVID excitement nowadays, the smaller assisted living places, they are barely being touched by the virus, barely being touched because they've got higher infection control, a lot less traffic. The numbers are just astonishing how much different it is from the large facilities. Same thing is true with staph infections and deaths in general. It's just much safer from this particular virus. Additionally, there are fewer falls in small facilities. People don't get lost in hallways or neglected. Nobody asks, where's my mother? because everybody knows where everybody is and who's missing at the breakfast table. There are a number of those kinds of pieces of information that are available from the Residential Assisted Living National Association. So if you're a member of that group, then you should call me or our executive director, or email us at the website there and,
Okay,
and get
great.
that information.
And we do have information we put together on behalf of our law firm as well. And
Okay.
one thing you might think about is bringing, if you think property values are going to be an issue, bring a realtor that knows the neighborhood. Think about however you could to, prove it, because you're kind of putting on a case. If it's a public hearing kind of a thing, you're putting on a case. So you're going to want to have somebody other than just you talking, a realtor. You could have like a senior advocate, anybody that would be able to speak on your behalf to the points you want to have made.
Sounds good.
Michelle's absolutely right about the information. So whether it's at your home where you're doing an open house or at a larger public venue, you should have flyers and whatnot with information about why this is better. You should have placards and people to speak to these things, to talk about fewer falls, fewer infections, less neglect and healthier lifestyle. All those kinds of things should be available so that that you have that information to spread around. It means you're spending a little bit on promotional material, but if it's your business at stake, that's important. Maybe, Michelle, we should turn this in a different direction and ask somebody who's in the real estate business, who's associated with no less than 19 of these assisted living homes, to ask if they're collecting any data on property values. Vern?
No, we're not collecting data at this point in time. And we're actually up to 22 right now. And we've got 3 more we're closing here in the next month or 2.
Wow.
So yeah, we'll be up to 25. We ran across a situation a while back that I wanted to at least tell you about and get your opinion. So one of our houses is in a high-end gated community, and it is not part of the HOA because it had been built by the developer as his little playhouse, and we ended up with it and turned it into assisted living. And the HOA has been very, very difficult in this situation, and our only access to that house is through the neighborhood. And they complained about the residents in wheelchairs on their property. And I thought that was kind of pushing the boundaries of discrimination. I'm curious what you guys would think of that scenario.
Well, I would just ask, do they let people who aren't in wheelchairs be on their property?
Well, that's a good question. Their complaint was that they don't have insurance, and they would only allow the people to go down one side of the street to be able to leave the neighborhood, because that's all we're allowed is ingress and egress. So if the neighbor or if the wheelchair bound person wanted to go up the street, then that was a problem for them.
Wow, that sounds like discrimination to me.
Sure felt like it. And we were told this by
Yeah.
the neighbor across the street, who happens to be the president of the HOA.
Well, one way to spot it is to look at the other protected categories under the Fair Housing Act, which are race, ethnicity, national origin, So if they said, well, if you're a Black or brown person, you can walk on the right side of the street, but not the left side of the street. What would you say? Is that discrimination?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it's the same thing.
I think it's borderline what they're talking about. And their point is they're not part of the HOA, so they shouldn't be on the property. It's a gated community. That's their argument.
Oh, that raises a bunch of other interesting questions that might be beyond this group discussion.
Well, again, I just want to bounce that off you and see,
Yeah.
kind of what your thoughts were on that. And we don't know.
You might want to collect some data. I mean, just kind of observe how they're treating other people. If you see other people who are obviously from the outside, somebody from down the street comes and takes a nice walk around their neighborhood or something, just
Yeah.
kind of document that and just get some data on it.
They might have an easement. That property might have an access easement. There's a number of
I
issues
think we
here.
do. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we do have that access.
There's a whole lot of issues here. Anyway,
Hey, I have a question.
Hi, Megan.
So my question is, our neighbors have been very unneighborly, and we're not very popular in the community right now. But how should we address cyberbullying? They're getting on these Nextdoor apps and basically saying that we're money hungry and we're trying to start a business, and that we're not doing it for the elderly, we're doing it to make money. And I mean, we've never even spoken to most of these people that are posting on these sites, but they're calling out like our names and our specific address, and it's just making me and my husband feel really uncomfortable to even be in our house right now. So how would
Wow.
you- yeah.
That's the first time. That's a first, Megan. I'm sorry that you're going through that. I haven't heard that before. Is your home open already?
No, we're in the process of opening it. We're probably about 2 months out.
well, there's a bit of a social shaming that you can do to go in the other direction. One is that these people, you know who they are, and you can identify them with reasonable particularity. And so these are the kinds of statements that you could read. You've seen comedians and actors and whatnot read the hate mail that they get just to mock these people. So the question is whether or not that would be something worth doing, or talking about how obviously discriminatory it is. Now you might just save all that stuff for a rainy day in case there is some litigation or objection from the city or a planning commission or something like that, in which case that stuff is fuel for other arguments that you might make in the future.
It might be fodder for a complaint to HUD or the state fair housing office. You know, I mean, you could try to start out by educating people, sending them personal messages saying, hey, I'm not sure if you know this, but our residents and we are protected by federal and state law. And, you know, just kind of doing some education. And if that doesn't stop it, then maybe take it to the next level and file some complaints.
Okay, that sounds good. We tried to write a response that was trying to be educational, but that hasn't helped. And they came back with asking us specific questions like, are you and your husband going to live in the house? And things that we felt like wasn't really their business. So we haven't responded.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us. That's something definitely that we'll have to consider. That's a new one.
It's a new
And
one,
what, it matter if we are living in the house or not, or is that not something that matters?
Doesn't matter.
No,
Okay.
they're just, you know, whatever it is you say is just going to be used, just like we see in politics nowadays. No matter what's said, it's used in a negative way against somebody. So that's not really the game that you want to play. It's batting the ball back and forth like that. You need to somehow get past that.
Okay, well, thank you guys.
You're welcome.
Wow, cyberbullying in the neighborhood. That's a new one.
People on Nextdoor sometimes can be very, very mean, and it just blows my mind. These are your neighbors, and they got their names attached. It just, I'm shocked what I see on Nextdoor sometimes. It's worse than Facebook.
It's still a group, and we know about groups. Not a lot of thinking going on.
Right.
But if you show up at their house, it's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and they'd never say this to your face. You know, they're protected by that keyboard.
Yeah, that's true.
Any
Well,
other questions? Sorry.
That was terrific. I really enjoyed your stories, Brian. And I got a lot out of that presentation. Anybody else have any other questions before we move on? Okay. Well,
Yeah, I have some questions that aren't specifically for Michelle. Are we going to be able to ask some other questions later?
if you know it, Michelle, if you're okay with taking a few more questions, I'm okay with that.
Well, no, I mean for it, not necessarily for like the legal side, more just like kind of running it in general.
Oh, this is a great group to talk to. There's a lot of assisted living expertise in the room.
Oh, it's more just like at what point, what's kind of like a break even point? Like how many people? Like 5 people, 7 people, 10 people. Like what's kind of the ideal range? Again, kind of based on zoning. It might be one of those things that can't quite have as many. So kind of what's like a good break even point? And then kind of beyond that, like just, some other questions about just the medical staff and numbers and that type of thing.
I could certainly throw in a little bit there from what I've seen, which has been dozens and dozens of P&Ls. If you're in private pay, 6 is pretty much a break-even point. And I always tell my clients that you need at least 10, because in this industry, we're dealing with people at end of life, and it's so common that when you have one person die, 2 more will follow them. They for some uncanny reason, they tend to die in 3s. And if you have an 8-bed and your break-even point is 6, then you're going to be in the negative when that happens. And it's not if it happens, it's when it happens. So 10 beds, if you're in that situation, at least you still have a little bit of room in that. If you're in Medicaid, that's a tough deal. You're 9 or 10 before you're starting to break even. Because you got to figure your costs on average are going to be 22 to 24,000 just with one employee. And do the math and see what it ends up being. So that's what I've seen. We may have Mitch on still, and Mitch has a number of houses. He might have another opinion if he's listening and wants to join us. Or he might be doing something backwards. There he is. Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Vern, it's actually Jennifer. Mitch
Hey,
and I are on together. How are you guys?
Hey, guys.
Doing great.
So, yeah, definitely numbers, break-even point analysis is a big piece of what you want your business plan to be. I have found in Colorado, we have 8 homes and we have always the fallback of innovate or spend down. Colorado really doesn't support pure private pay for very long. A lot of people are looking for a spend down opportunity. So that's a nice second option for people who come to your house. Depending on whether you're memory care or you're assisted living, if you're assisted living, price point isn't as high typically. You're going to charge anywhere from $4,500 to $5,500, sometimes $6,500 for a room. Memory care, you're starting at $5,200, you're going to go up to $7,000. So it depends on the type of house as well, and the clients that you're going to be taking in.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's always good to hear from you.
Thanks.
It's great information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I would say from a zoning standpoint, if you're in a city that has a limit of 8 and you're thinking you want reasonable accommodation, it's a lot better to ask for reasonable accommodation for 10 or 12. That's a lot easier to get than the higher number. So if you do find a situation where your pro forma can work at 10, that's a much easier lift from a zoning standpoint.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions they want to pose at this time?
Hey, I did just want to say one more thing, Mike, since Mike's going into Denver. Denver is changing its zoning code, so it's good if you've got something going now. That's probably good. But keep an eye out on those zoning changes if you're looking at Denver for future houses, because it's underway right now. There's a lot of information on the Denver website.
Yeah, I've been following it and going to meetings, and yeah, I'm definitely involved with that. Maybe I'll email you offline about something specific.
Okay, cool.
If you don't mind about that. Okay,
Just
thanks.
wanted to make sure to bring that up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you, but I definitely have my eye on that.
Cool.
So thank you again, Michelle and Brian. I'm throwing up some applause for you guys, and hopefully everybody else can share in that applause.
Awesome.
Nice to see everybody. Thanks for inviting us.
We appreciate it. So next we go into our haves and wants, and this is an opportunity if you have a service or if you have a deal or if you are looking for something, that this is an opportunity for you to express that to the entire group. Do we have anybody that is looking for anything or has something, or looking for partners, looking for money, looking for a house, looking for furniture, whatever it may be, or has something? And don't all raise your hand at once, but okay.
I'm looking for just about anything that anybody wants to provide. I'm definitely looking for possibly a partner if they want to join in with what I'm doing. Again, it's an 8-bedroom place that I just bought directly next door to another assisted living facility, but I'm trying to make it into something more. But I would absolutely love a partner or somebody knowledgeable in the business to be able to, share in all the profits and everything, and be able to help me out with my first one, and then be able to move on to some other ones. But absolutely looking for assistance.
Terrific. Is that down in the Springs, Jessica?
It is, correct.
Okay. Good, good. Well, we've got a couple people here that are in the Springs. So, anyone else want to express any haves or wants?
Hi, Vern. This is Megan again. I'm actually interested in what you're offering, and I'd like to learn more about that.
Okay. You could give me a call or shoot me an email, and we can set up an appointment to discuss what it is you're trying to do.
Okay.
And, we can chat tomorrow about that.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'll share something. I went and looked at a house today that might make sense for somebody. We're still trying to figure this deal out, but it has 12 bedrooms and it's licensed for 14. It's an up and running mental illness house, and it's in Lakewood. And I think we can get a pretty decent number on the deal. It may, if we wanted to convert it to private pay, we need to probably throw some more money at the deal. Right now we're talking around $950 for the deal, and we might be able to throw another $100,000 on that one. So we'd be looking for an operator to come in and take that deal. If anybody is interested in something like that, we can chat about it and see if it's a good fit. That's just one that fell on my lap here in the last day or so, and I went and looked at it this morning. So just wanted to put that out there. You guys can see my screen, I presume. If there's no other announcements, haves or wants, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the group. If we ever get back to live meetings, then our meetings, we charge $15 for an individual or $25 for partners, or you can have a yearly membership, and that yearly membership includes some of those benefits that we talked about earlier with the AALR National Association. That's $80 for individuals and $120 for partners. And we're always looking for vendor sponsors so that we can get you in front of the group. And if we ever do start meeting again, depending on how all this goes, our next meeting is going to be at Torchy's Tacos, which is on Arapahoe Road. They've got a room that accommodates 40 people. And that is near Arapahoe Road and I-25. So it's a little bit south for what we're normally used to. We were meeting about Colorado on I-25 before, but we lost that space because they wanted to make us eat off of a buffet bar and have a $400 minimum, and that just didn't make sense anymore. So, and I don't know if anybody's ever eaten at Torchy's Tacos, but the tacos are really, really good. So, again, it's Mexican food, but hey, it is what it is. And I think that's all we got for tonight. again, I'm going to leave this open for a little bit so that you guys can